3 days after I handed her $77 million, my daughter threw my suitcase onto the street and told me I was no longer part of her family. I stood there, watching the gates close, and I didn't cry. Not then. I felt something colder than sadness, something heavier than betrayal. I gave her my whole life, and she gave me exile. But she had forgotten one thing. I built that empire she's trying to erase me from, and by the time she realized it, I was already turning the tide. She thought I would stay quiet. She was wrong, very wrong. I didn't expect the sound of my own suitcase hitting the concrete to echo like that. It rolled twice before stopping near the storm drain, and I remember thinking how ridiculous it looked. A black leather case with gold trim, sitting there like it had wandered off by mistake. But it hadn't. My daughter had thrown it, with both hands, in front of her security camera, in front of her housekeeper, and in front of Emily, her 14-year-old daughter, who stood frozen on the steps, one hand covering her mouth. The words Diana said after that were sharper than the throw itself. "You don't belong here anymore. This is my house, my company, my name now." Then she turned her back. The gate clicked shut before I could speak. Not that I would have, even if I had the breath. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, maybe less. No one moved. Not Emily, not the housekeeper, not me. I bent down, picked up my bag, and walked. I didn't cry, not yet. I felt something building, but it wasn't tears. It was heat, in my chest, in my throat. And it wasn't sadness, not even grief. It was the hollow ache of disbelief, of knowing that someone you loved more than your own pulse had just erased you with the flick of a hand. I had given her $77 million 3 weeks earlier, transferred it into the living trust that bore her name. All legal, all signed. A legacy I built from nothing over 4 decades of work. Property, hotels, retail strips along the coast. I thought I was stepping back, thought I was handing her the future. I didn't know I was handing her a sword. I walked to the corner where the bus stop used to be, though I didn't expect it to still be there. It wasn't. Just a metal bench now. I sat. My hands trembled, not from age, but from rage contained. And Emily, sweet girl. She ran out 15 minutes later without shoes. She didn't say anything, just dropped a paper bag beside me and slipped a hoodie around my shoulders. Inside the bag was a water bottle and a wrapped sandwich. She whispered, "I'm sorry," then ran back before anyone noticed. I held onto that bag like it was worth more than the trust I had just signed over. In that moment, it was. If you're still listening, if you've made it this far, let me ask you something in your heart. Have you ever been erased by your own child? Have you ever handed them the keys to everything and watched them shut the door behind you without blinking? Because that was the moment I stopped being a mother and started becoming something else. Not cruel, not vengeful, but surgical. I stayed in a motel that night, the kind with peeling paint and a buzzing bathroom light. I didn't care. I barely slept. I sat with the light on, notebook open, and started writing down what I remembered from every document I had signed. Dates, lawyers, language. I wasn't looking for comfort. I was looking for openings. And I remembered Victor, my old lawyer, my old friend. He was the only one I trusted. He had drafted the original trust documents before Diana insisted on moving it to her team, the ones she thought were airtight. But Victor had told me something once, years ago, that when a trust is active only during the lifetime of the grantor, and if the grantor remains mentally sound, they hold the real power, even if the beneficiary thinks they've won. That sentence came back to me around 3 a.m., and I wrote it down on a yellow motel pad. They think they've won. That morning, I called Victor. I hadn't spoken to him in 2 years, not since I retired. He picked up on the second ring. By 9 a.m., I was in his office. And that's when things started turning. Not with yelling, not with threats, not with drama, but with precision. Because the thing Diana never understood was this. I never built an empire by being kind. I built it by being quiet, watching everything, and waiting for the right moment to strike. And now, my moment had come. Let's just say, the real show was about to begin. Stay with me. You don't want to miss what happened next. Victor Hale hadn't aged much in the years since I last saw him. Same grey temples, same brown leather briefcase with worn edges. His office smelled like lemon oil and old paper, and the morning light through the window made the dust sparkle. He didn't offer small talk when I walked in. He just nodded once and gestured toward the chair across from him. I sat down, pulled the folder from my purse, and laid it flat on his desk. She thinks she owns it all, I said. But she doesn't. Not yet. He flipped open the folder, scanned the top page, then looked up slowly. His eyes narrowed, not in confusion, but in focus. You never signed the revocation form, he said. I nodded. I remembered. Diana had pushed me for months to dissolve the original trust, the one Victor had helped me establish 20 years ago. She called it outdated, said her lawyers could set up something more modern. But I had delayed, found excuses. And when I finally gave in, I had only authorized the transfer of title, not the revocation of control. A subtle difference, one she hadn't noticed. But Victor had. Then she doesn't own the trust, he said. Not legally. She can't access the remainder without your approval. And if she's already used portions for personal gain, that could trigger a breach. That's what I needed to hear. I leaned back in the chair, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I was clear. I want her audited, quietly. I want to know what she's moved, where, and how much she's trying to claim as her own. Victor nodded again, already reaching for a yellow legal pad. She's going to feel cornered, he said. Good, I replied. She should. We spent the next 2 hours reviewing documents, every clause, every line. The original trust still named me as the grantor with full authority. Diana had only been made co-trustee under conditional language. Conditional, meaning reversible. She had no clue. Or maybe she did, but assumed I'd be too old or too soft to do anything about it. She forgot who taught her how to play hardball. Victor contacted a forensic accountant named Marissa Chen. I had worked with her once, years ago, during a messy land deal that involved 4 shell companies and one very dishonest brother-in-law. She was discreet, surgical, and relentless. I liked her immediately. By that afternoon, she was already digging. Diana wouldn't notice anything yet. That was the plan. We didn't want confrontation. We wanted confirmation. I checked into a short-term rental near the coast. Nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, clean kitchen, no questions asked. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I left my name off the lease. Paid 3 months in advance. For the first time in days, I slept. When I woke up, I made coffee, opened my notebook, and wrote 1 sentence at the top of the page. She took my name off the door. I'll take hers off the company. I wasn't seeking revenge for the sake of it. I wasn't chasing back $77 million. What I wanted back was something quieter. My name, my place, my dignity. And Diana had taken those from me before she touched a cent. Marissa called on the 3rd day. Her voice was calm, but her words cut deep. She's transferred over $12 million to private accounts, she said. Mostly under shell corporations, all set up within the last 4 months. Some registered in Nevada, one in the British Virgin Islands. I let out a long breath. She's also moved title on 2 properties into her personal name, ones that were under the trust. That was the crack. The legal exposure. That's breach, Victor confirmed when I told him. If we document it and present it right, we can freeze her access to everything. But it has to be clean. No mess, no threats. That's what I wanted. Not a scandal, not noise, just silence and certainty. I didn't want her to see me coming. I wanted her to wake up and find the empire she tried to steal slipping from her fingers like sand. That night, I sat on the porch of the rental, listening to the wind off the water. I thought of Emily, of how she looked at me before she ran back into the house. I wondered if Diana noticed. I wondered if she even cared. I had raised a daughter who could speak 4 languages by age 10, who graduated early, who closed her first $1 million deal at 26. I raised her to be strong, but I hadn't raised her to be kind. And now I would remind her what real strength looked like. Not with yelling, but with paper, with proof, with power she forgot I still held. By the end of the week, Victor would draft the petition. And Diana, she wouldn't even see it coming. By the end of that week, Victor had everything prepared. The petition was clean, backed by documentation Marissa had uncovered in less than 4 days. Diana had been moving funds slowly but strategically. 12 million was only the beginning. If we waited another month, she'd drain twice that. Maybe more. The properties she transferred were only 2 of 5 held under the trust. She was building a wall, 1 stolen brick at a time, confident I would never climb it. Victor said the best time to strike was during the next quarterly meeting of the board. It wasn't a flashy gathering, just a handful of shareholders, senior advisors, and Diana, playing queen at the head of the table. She didn't know I was still on the distribution list. She hadn't removed my name from the email threads. I wasn't visible, but I was still inside. That gave us a date, 2 weeks out. Enough time to collect statements, enough time to position the right people in the right place. Marissa expanded her search. Every shell company had a name that meant something to Diana. Little personal touches she thought no one would notice. One was called Arden Coast Holdings. Arden was the street we lived on when she was in high school. Another was called Elowen Global, the middle name she gave to Emily. These weren't random choices. She was building her empire with stolen tools and painting them in sentimental colors. I didn't feel sad when I read the reports. I felt embarrassed for her, not just for the greed, but for the arrogance. She really thought I wouldn't look. She thought I was done, retired, soft, a name on a plaque and nothing more. But I was still watching, and I wasn't alone. Linda Ramos called me the following Monday. She lived 2 doors down from Diana, had known us for years. Her late husband used to mow both our lawns when we lived in the old neighborhood. We weren't close friends, but she was always respectful, always observant. She had seen the suitcase moment, the one I hadn't spoken about to anyone, not even Victor. She said she had something to show me. I agreed to meet her at the park, by the benches near the old bandstand. When I arrived, she was already there, holding her phone. No makeup, sunglasses on, hair tied back. She wasn't looking for attention, just the truth. She played the clip, less than a minute long, her voice in the background, barely a whisper. That's her mother. She just threw her out. Oh my God. The video caught the entire exchange, the suitcase landing on the stone, Diana's voice, sharp and cold, Emily in the doorway, frozen. I watched it once, then again, then asked if she'd send it to me. Linda didn't ask questions. She just pressed send. That night, I sat in the kitchen of the rental house, phone in hand, watching that clip until the battery died. It wasn't rage I felt. It wasn't even shame. It was clarity. The moment I was erased had been recorded, and now it would become the trigger. I called Victor and told him we needed one more thing added to the plan, not just the financial mismanagement, not just the illegal transfers. I wanted to file an ethics violation with the board, conduct unbecoming of a trustee, abuse of family authority, exploitation. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the behavior and the pattern. He agreed. Quietly, he reached out to Reiner, who now served as a consultant for corporate compliance hearings. They weren't close friends, but Reiner had always respected Victor's cases. I had met Reiner once, briefly, at a private event for civic donors. He'd remembered me. I still had allies. Not many, but enough. Emily texted me the next evening. Short message, just 5 words. I miss you. Are you okay? I didn't answer right away. I wanted to. I stared at the words, trying to decide whether answering would help her or hurt her. I decided on simple. I'm okay. I love you. She didn't write back, but I saw the message delivered. That was enough. In the mornings, I started walking again. Slow steps along the boardwalk, hands in my coat pockets. Not to think, but to clear my thoughts. I didn't want to act from anger. I didn't want my decisions to come from bitterness. That wasn't who I was, not even now. This wasn't about revenge. This was about course correction, about truth, about memory. Diana had rewritten our history in the eyes of her staff, her clients, even her own daughter. She painted me as a relic, a sentimental liability, something to be honored in name, but discarded in practice. But I had kept everything: contracts, drafts, letters she wrote when she was 15, begging to intern at my office. Pictures of her first check, framed on my old desk. She had forgotten where she came from. I hadn't. And now I was going to remind her, not through lectures, not through anger, but through timing. By the end of that week, Victor had contacted the board, quietly, legally. He requested that I be added back to the meeting agenda, not as a guest, but as an active participant. The bylaws allowed it. My co-trustee status had never been officially terminated. They accepted the request. I would speak at the meeting. Diana still didn't know. That was how I wanted it. Let her wear her best suit. Let her smile in front of the press. Let her pretend she built it all on her own. And then when the room was full and the lights were bright and the reporters were ready, I would stand up, not to beg, but to expose. The morning of the board meeting arrived with a steady wind off the coast and a sky the color of steel. I dressed in the same navy blazer I used to wear on acquisition days, back when signatures changed cities. The fabric hung looser on me now, but the posture underneath hadn't changed. I pinned my hair back, kept my makeup neutral, and packed the file I had built with Victor and Marissa. The meeting was held at the firm's downtown headquarters, a high-rise I bought in cash during a recession no one thought we'd survive. Diana had since replaced the marble lobby with engineered stone and swapped the gold signage for muted slate. The warmth was gone. Efficiency had replaced legacy. That was her way. The receptionist didn't recognize me. She offered a polite smile and asked if I had an appointment. I gave her my name and watched her face shift as she searched the list and found it. She apologized, stood quickly, and offered water. I declined. I didn't come to be served. I came to be seen. The boardroom was on the 34th floor, floor-to-ceiling glass. 12 seats, 10 filled when I walked in. Some glanced up. A few froze. Diana was standing at the front, gesturing toward a digital presentation projected on the wall. She paused mid-sentence when she saw me. There was a flicker of something across her face. Not fear, not guilt. Calculation. She smiled. Thin. Professional. Mother, I wasn't told you'd be joining us today. I placed my folder on the table, pulled out the chair nearest the middle, and sat without a word. My hands were steady, my shoulders square. I didn't need to raise my voice or make a scene. My presence was the message. Victor entered 2 minutes later, briefcase in hand. He nodded to the board, took a seat beside me, and opened his notes. The meeting resumed. Diana clicked through quarterly figures. Margins, market expansion, international licensing. The same buzzwords she had been throwing around for 2 years. Some board members nodded, others looked tired. I watched her performance, noting how she avoided looking at me directly. Then came the moment we had planned for. She moved to the final slide, a projection of upcoming acquisitions. She referenced funds that had not yet been cleared by the trust. She spoke of properties not yet closed, names of holding companies Marissa had traced just a week earlier. She called them strategic assets. Victor waited until she finished. Then he stood. Before the board moves to vote on the allocation of new assets, there is a matter of serious concern we need to address. Diana's smile tightened. Victor handed each member a sealed packet. Inside were financial records, transfer logs, ownership filings, cross-referenced transactions between trust accounts and shell corporations bearing names tied directly to Diana's personal history. A pause settled over the room. These transactions violate the fiduciary responsibility of a co-trustee, Victor said. There was no need to dramatize it. The numbers did all the work. Diana attempted to counter. She spoke quickly, accusing Victor of twisting the documents. She called the structures legal. Standard. Then Linda's video was played. One board member, an older woman named Carla, placed her hand over her mouth. Another whispered something to the man beside him. The suitcase. The words. The dismissal. This is conduct unbecoming of a trustee, Victor said. It raises ethical concerns and reputational risk to the firm and its leadership. I did not look at Diana. I didn't have to. Reiner was seated near the far end of the table. He cleared his throat, then spoke in a calm voice. Given the gravity of the evidence, I move that we suspend Diana's trustee authority pending a formal review. A vote was called. 8 in favor. 2 abstained. None opposed. Diana stood silent, her lips parted but no sound coming out. The chairwoman asked if I had anything to add. I rose slowly, opened my folder, and removed one single sheet. It was my handwritten letter of reinstatement. Simple. 1 paragraph. Dated, notarized. I placed it on the table. The trust was never dissolved, I said, only mismanaged. The board moved to adjourn. Reporters waiting outside had already picked up whispers. Nothing official had been said yet, but the shift in energy was visible. I walked out first, leaving Victor behind to finalize paperwork. The elevator ride down was quiet. When I reached the lobby, the receptionist stood, as if unsure what to say. I nodded once and stepped out into the wind. The city hadn't changed much, but I had. I didn't go back to the rental that night. I stayed in a small hotel nearby, ordered tea, turned off my phone, sat by the window and watched the skyline turn gold with dusk. I had not shouted. I had not begged. I had simply shown up. And the world I built remembered who I was. By morning, the headlines were already circulating. They didn't name me directly, but they didn't have to. Phrases like surprise reinstatement and unexpected appearance of founding trustee floated beneath photos of Diana exiting the boardroom, face half-turned, lips tight. The press had waited outside long enough to sense when power shifted. They always did. Victor called just after 9. The emergency injunction had gone through. Diana's access to all trust-linked accounts was frozen. The transfer of properties she had filed 2 months earlier was now under official review. The Finance Committee had moved to audit the transactions fully. The response was faster than I expected, but then again, Diana's errors were loud and easy to track once someone looked closely. I didn't reply with triumph. I simply thanked him, closed my notebook, and finished my coffee. That afternoon, I walked past the old flagship store on Wilton Avenue, the very first property I bought, when I still had to sign leases under a different name to be taken seriously. It used to be a small art supply shop with red awnings and warped glass. Now it was a boutique chain Diana rebranded under her initials. Cold grey logo, mirrored shelves, artificial lighting. I didn't go inside. I only stood across the street and watched the manager rearrange a window display. She looked young, determined, probably didn't know who I was. I felt no bitterness, only distance. It wasn't mine anymore, not in that form. Later, Victor sent over the list of affected accounts. Diana had routed not just money, but contracts, partnership offers, a silent acquisition deal in Miami, all through dummy companies she thought no one would trace. Marissa had already flagged 3 more in Delaware alone. The scope of it was wider than I imagined. This wasn't just a lapse in judgment. It was a systematic attempt to erase me while using everything I had built. That evening, I met Reiner in person. He suggested a quiet dinner, somewhere away from downtown. We chose a small Italian place with linen napkins and no cameras. He didn't come to offer sympathy. That wasn't his nature. He came to speak plainly. "The board respects what you did," he said. "But this isn't over. Diana still holds influence, still has allies. Some won't turn until the structure crumbles completely." "I understand," I said. "That's why I'm not done." He nodded once, then folded his hands. "What you did back there." It wasn't just a legal correction. It reminded people who the foundation of this company really was. After he left, I walked back to the hotel on foot. I moved slowly, not from exhaustion, but from focus. I needed to think through the next step, not just financial, personal. Diana had remained silent since the boardroom. No calls, no messages, no appearances. That silence said more than any statement could. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't regrouping. She was waiting. For what? I didn't know. But I had the sense she wasn't finished either. 2 days later, I got the first letter. Not an email. A letter. Delivered to the hotel, handwritten envelope. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting. Emily. Inside was a short note, neat cursive, careful language. I saw what happened. I don't know how to feel. Mum hasn't talked to me since. I miss you. I'm scared. I don't know what I'm supposed to believe. She didn't ask for answers. She didn't ask me to come back. She only asked for honesty. And that I could give her. I wrote back the same day. "You don't have to choose sides," I said, "but you always have the right to know the truth." I didn't write about the money. I didn't mention the properties or the fraud. I only reminded her of the time we built the dollhouse together, the summer she learned to ride her bike, the morning she brought me burnt toast and called it breakfast in bed. Because what she needed wasn't strategy, it was memory. By the end of the week, Marissa confirmed 2 more violations. One involving a loan Diana had signed as if she were the sole trustee. Another involving intellectual property rebranded under her name alone. Each move added to the legal case. Each made her position weaker. Victor drafted the formal charges: mismanagement, misrepresentation, abuse of fiduciary power. Enough for the board to consider permanent removal, not just suspension. We had the documents, the footage, the financial trail, even the video of the suitcase now archived and time-stamped. But I hesitated, not from fear, not from guilt, from something else. I didn't want to destroy her. I only wanted her to stop pretending I never existed. Victor asked if I was sure. I said yes. He submitted the papers. 3 hours later, Diana's lawyers issued a brief statement, generic, denying wrongdoing, accusing the firm of bias, claiming the reinstatement was irregular, the usual flailing before the fall. That night, I stood on the hotel balcony and looked out over the lights. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vindicated. I was simply clear. This wasn't revenge. This was removal, peeling away the falsehood she had painted over my name. And the canvas underneath. Still strong. Still mine. The fallout began quicker than I expected. Within 48 hours of the formal filing, the financial media picked up the story. It started as quiet chatter on professional forums, then migrated to mid-tier blogs, and by day 3, it reached the business pages of 2 national papers. The headlines didn't hold back. They called it internal misconduct, abuse of family trust, sudden collapse of executive control. Diana's name was in bold font, followed by words she once weaponized against others: mismanagement, negligence, breach of duty. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. I simply closed the article and looked out the window of the hotel room I had grown used to. It was quiet that morning. Rain streaked the glass. The city moved below me like it always had, unaffected and relentless. Victor warned me about the speed of the unraveling. He said once the story caught wind, everything else would follow. He was right. Clients pulled out of deals. A major partner requested a pause on joint projects. Several mid-level executives submitted internal complaints. Marissa continued tracking transfers and inconsistencies. Each day, she sent me a summary. Diana had created a tangled web of transactions designed to look legitimate, but under scrutiny, they collapsed into patterns of concealment. It wasn't just unethical, it was prosecutable. The board, now under public pressure, scheduled an emergency vote. They would decide whether to remove Diana permanently as co-trustee and revoke her decision-making power across all trust-related entities. Victor prepared my statement. It was brief, factual. We would not attend the vote in person. It would be handled internally. Diana would be notified once the decision was final. I agreed to the plan. But I asked Victor for one thing. I wanted the results to be delivered in person. Not by letter. Not by phone. I wanted her to hear it face to face. Just once. He hesitated but understood. I didn't ask for a confrontation. I asked for clarity. That afternoon, I walked the long path behind the courthouse where Diana once stood beside me, years ago, when I was awarded a city business recognition. She had worn red heels and kept clapping after everyone else had stopped. I remembered how proud she looked. I remembered how much I loved her in that moment. The image returned to me now, not as pain, but as contrast. She wasn't that woman anymore, and I wasn't the mother she assumed would stay silent. 3 days later, the board voted, unanimous, permanent removal, legal separation from all decision-making responsibilities. Full authority returned to me as grantor. All motions passed. The call from Victor came just after noon. "She's going to fight it," he said. "Let her," I replied. The truth's heavier than any argument. We scheduled the meeting for 2 days later. Neutral ground. No press, no board members. Just her, Victor, and me. A quiet room. A long table. One final conversation. The space we chose was a private conference room in a mid-rise off the highway. Unassuming. No logos, no symbolism. Diana arrived first. She sat at the far end, arms crossed, face unreadable, her hair pulled back tight. Black suit, no jewelry. She looked smaller somehow. Victor opened the meeting with protocol, reviewed the vote, laid out the terms, offered her space to speak. She didn't. He turned to me, gave me the floor. I stood slowly, not for drama, for grounding. My hands rested lightly on the table's edge. I told her the decision was final, that every document had been reviewed, every transfer traced, every conflict weighed. I told her the removal wasn't just necessary, it was inevitable. Still, she didn't speak. Not until I sat back down. Then she leaned forward. "You think this fixes anything?" I looked at her calmly. "This isn't a fix. This is a boundary." She shook her head, scoffing. "You humiliated me. You had this planned the whole time." I answered without raising my voice. "No. I gave you $77 million. What you did with it was your decision. What I did after that was mine." She stood then, hands planted firmly on the table. "You will regret this." I stayed seated. I already regret many things. Staying quiet for too long is one of them. Her mouth tightened, her jaw locked, but she didn't speak again. Victor handed her a copy of the formal documentation. She took it, opened it briefly, then walked out of the room without a word. When the door closed behind her, the silence was strange. Not heavy, just final. I stayed in my chair for another minute, breathing slowly. I thought of Emily. I thought of the dollhouse, the bike rides, the burnt toast. And I hoped she wasn't watching her mother become someone she wouldn't recognize. But I couldn't stop that part. All I could do was protect what was left. And finally, I had. I returned to the rental house later that afternoon. I set my bag down by the door, removed my blazer, and folded it carefully across the back of the chair. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that settles after something final has taken place. No arguments, no slammed doors. Just the absence of noise that follows after control has shifted for good. I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the window. The sky was overcast. The trees were still. Everything in me felt still too. Not in a lifeless way, but in a way that said the struggle had moved from the surface to something deeper, something quieter. Diana hadn't followed up. No calls, no letters, not even through lawyers. That kind of silence usually signals either acceptance or preparation. I didn't assume either. I'd spent long enough learning that distance isn't always peace. Victor said the board would begin the transition process within the week. I would reassume all fiduciary responsibility. Financial audits would continue. Any pending contracts she had touched were paused for review. Her name would slowly vanish from every letterhead she once chased. The firm would not collapse, it would recalibrate, and I would guide that process until the structure was clean again. Still, that wasn't the part weighing on me. It was Emily. I hadn't heard from her since the letter. I didn't expect much. She was still a child navigating a world being pulled apart by the very people who raised her. I didn't want to pressure her. I didn't want to become the same kind of force Diana had been to me. But I couldn't shake the memory of her eyes the last time I saw her. The flicker of worry, the silent plea, the helplessness of someone trying to love two people pulling in opposite directions. So I waited, and I watched the days go by. I cleaned the same surfaces twice, walked the same block in the morning and again at dusk. I drank coffee that grew cold and made lists I never used. I sat on the couch and tried not to stare at the phone. It rang one afternoon, a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring twice before I picked up. Her voice was quiet. She said she didn't want to talk long. She said school was stressful, that her mother wasn't speaking much, that everything in the house felt like it might break if someone breathed too hard. Then she said she missed me. I didn't tell her what had happened in that conference room. I didn't mention her mother's removal. I only asked if she was safe. She said yes, I believed her. Before she hung up, she asked if we could meet. Somewhere quiet, somewhere no one knew. I said yes. We met 2 days later at a bookstore cafe, tucked behind an old laundromat. It was the kind of place where no one asked questions. The music was soft, the lights dim. She wore a hoodie with the sleeves too long and a baseball cap pulled low. She hugged me before we even sat down. I had brought nothing with me. No files, no updates, only myself. She looked older, not in a dramatic way, just a little more aware, like something inside her had shifted too. We talked about small things at first. Her classes, her favorite podcast, the dog down the street she still walked sometimes. She mentioned her mother only once, and even then it was with a distance that told me she didn't know how to feel. I didn't force anything. I didn't offer explanations. I let the silence fill what words couldn't. Eventually, she reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote this," she said, "for school." But I didn't turn it in. She placed it on the table and slid it across to me. I didn't open it. Not yet. I waited until she left, until I was alone at the table, with her scent still lingering in the air and the chair across from me still warm. Then I read it. It was a short essay. Honest. Unpolished. Full of questions she didn't know how to phrase out loud. She wrote about what it feels like when people you love turn into strangers, about trying to love someone while not liking what they've done, about hearing one story at home and sensing a different truth in your gut. She wrote about memory and silence and the pressure of pretending everything is normal when your whole world is shifting under your feet. She didn't name names, but she didn't need to. I folded the page carefully and tucked it into my coat pocket. Later that evening, I called Victor and told him I would be stepping back from day-to-day management after the transition was complete. He didn't question me. He only asked for a date. 3 weeks. That would be enough time. I didn't need to control the company again. I just needed to make sure the rot was gone before I left it behind. Then I could return to something more valuable. My granddaughter. Myself. Peace. Not as an escape, but as a choice. The morning I made my final walk into the office, the air was heavy with the first signs of spring. Not warm, not blooming, just that quiet shift in the wind when winter begins to loosen its grip. I carried no files, no folders, only the keycard I'd used for over 30 years. The receptionist didn't question me this time. She simply nodded, as if some unspoken understanding had returned. I took the elevator alone. 34 floors. The doors opened to the familiar hush of brushed concrete, glass, and artificial greenery. The same space Diana once redesigned to feel modern. Now it felt sterile. A place curated to impress rather than belong. Victor met me in the corridor. He wore a grey suit and held a single sheet of paper in his hand. The final transition memo. It named me as acting trustee through the quarter and listed the motion for a permanent replacement effective next term. My name would remain as founder emerita, but I would no longer hold authority. That was by choice. That was the plan. We walked to the boardroom together, It wasn't a formal meeting, just closing motions, no press, no legal teams, no ceremony. The few board members present stood when I entered. Some offered polite nods. A few smiled with something that felt close to respect. I signed where Victor indicated, each signature deliberate, each stroke the end of one sentence and the beginning of something else. I had no desire to extend my stay, no appetite to be surrounded by people who once whispered about my age while enjoying the structure I built. Victor placed the file into his briefcase and asked if I wanted to say anything. I shook my head. It was all said. And if they hadn't listened then, they wouldn't now. I exited the room quietly. No one followed. Downstairs, I paused once in the lobby. I turned back to glance at the wall behind the reception desk. My portrait still hung there. The old one. The one before Diana changed the branding, before she tried to repaint everything in her image. That photo would probably be taken down in the next refresh. I didn't mind. What mattered had never been on a wall. Outside, the sidewalk was busy. A delivery truck blocked part of the street. The wind picked up. I kept walking. A slow, steady pace with nothing left to defend. By mid-afternoon, I was back at the rental, packing the last of my things. I folded clothes, boxed books, sorted through papers. I wasn't going far, just across town. But this place had become something temporary long before I admitted it to myself. A place to plan, a place to survive, but not to live. The new apartment was smaller, a walk-up, no view, but it had light in the morning and a wide windowsill that caught warmth by noon. The kind of place where you could hear neighbours laughing through the wall and smell garlic from the floor below around dinner time. It felt alive. Emily came by 2 days later. She didn't say much when she arrived, just kicked off her shoes, sat on the couch, and picked up one of the old puzzle boxes I kept in a basket near the door. We worked side by side for over an hour without speaking. After a while, she asked if she could stay the weekend. I nodded. That night, I cooked her favourite stew. She set the table and washed the dishes without being asked. We didn't talk about Diana. We didn't talk about the company. We didn't need to. The next morning, I found a small envelope tucked beside my coffee mug. Inside was a folded note. Short, careful handwriting. Thank you for not forcing me to pick a side. Thank you for being steady when everything else was shaking. I didn't cry. I just made breakfast. Later that week, a letter arrived from Diana. Not typed, handwritten. It was 2 pages long, mostly filled with formal words. She admitted no guilt. She made no apologies. But in one paragraph near the end, she wrote something that didn't sound like her usual voice. She said losing control had made her realize she had never really understood what it meant to carry something rather than just wear it. I read that sentence twice. Then I folded the letter, slid it into the back of a drawer, and went back to chopping vegetables. I didn't know what she would do next. If she would disappear, rebrand, fight, or reflect. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't responsible for her healing. I had done what I needed to do, not to hurt her, not to shame her, but to protect myself, to protect what mattered. And now I was beginning again, not with fury, but with freedom. 2 weeks passed. Life didn't change overnight, but it shifted in ways that felt more permanent. The calls from the board stopped, the emails dwindled. I answered what needed to be answered, signed the last batch of closing papers, and returned the keycard by mail. Emily started visiting more often. Not every day, but enough for it to feel like a rhythm. She brought her schoolwork, sometimes her sketch pad, sometimes nothing at all. She sat by the window and watched the street below. She said it made her feel less stuck. I understood that. At her age, I remembered needing space that didn't belong to anyone else. A room without expectation. A chair where no one judged how long you sat still. One Saturday morning, I was folding laundry when she asked if I wanted to come to her art exhibit. It was at school, nothing big, but she said she had a piece in the front display. I told her I would be there, and I meant it. The exhibit was held in the school gymnasium. Posters taped to folding tables, paintings clipped to easels, rows of chairs set up in uneven lines. Her work was a charcoal sketch, a quiet composition of a single figure seated at a table, hands folded, face turned just out of view. She said it was called Still Holding. I didn't ask who it was meant to be. I didn't need to. On the way out, I noticed Diana standing near the back wall. She wasn't talking to anyone, just watching from a distance. Her eyes met mine once. No wave, no smile, but no avoidance either, just recognition. And maybe, just maybe, restraint. I didn't approach her. I turned and walked Emily to the car. She didn't mention her mother the entire ride. I didn't press. Silence can carry more than any apology when it's shared honestly. That night, I sat on the floor and opened the last of the boxes from the old storage unit. Most of it was paper. Contracts, handwritten notes, birthday cards. Some were from Diana, drawn in crayons, folded into strange shapes. There was one card from the year she turned 11, covered in glitter and tape. Inside it read, "I want to be just like you." I set it aside, not out of sentiment, but as a record. A reminder of the road between then and now. I didn't cry, but I felt it. The distance, the turning points, the moments that added up to loss. The following week, I was invited to speak at a women's leadership seminar hosted by the local university. Victor had passed my name along. At first, I declined. I didn't want to step back into rooms that reminded me of the ones I had left behind. But then I thought of the women in those rooms. I thought of what I wished someone had told me when I was younger, when I was still trying to be respected without losing my softness. So I said yes. The seminar was modest. Maybe 30 people in the audience, mostly women my age, a few younger, a few older. I didn't use a script. I just spoke. About legacy, about the weight of silence, about how dignity isn't something others hand you. You carve it yourself, sometimes from stone. When I finished, there was a pause, then applause. Not loud, but real. Afterward, a woman approached me and said she had followed the news. She didn't mention Diana by name, but I knew what she meant. She said she admired that I had chosen precision over spectacle, that I had protected myself without destroying what I once loved. I thanked her and left quietly. Later that evening, Emily called. She said she wanted to come over after school the next day. I said of course. When she arrived, she handed me a small envelope. Inside was a photograph. It was the sketch she had done, printed and framed. On the back, she had written, "For the one who still holds." I didn't need any more words than that. That weekend, I hung the frame above the desk in my bedroom, not to show it off, but to see it when I woke up, to remind myself that even after everything had been taken, something real remained. Not money, not power, not control, but connection. And that, I realized, had always been the part worth saving. The first time I walked past the office building again, it was nearly dusk. I hadn't planned to. My route just curved that way. And there it stood, tall and familiar, casting long shadows across the street. The windows caught the last light of the day, glowing pale gold. The place didn't look any different, but I did. That much I felt in the way my spine stayed straight and my hands didn't clench. I didn't go inside. I simply paused for a moment, as if acknowledging an old friend I no longer spoke to, but still remembered fondly. I watched a young woman walk out of the front doors, phone pressed to her ear, coat flapping behind her. She looked like me, decades ago, moving fast, chasing something. I hoped whatever she was chasing was worth it. Back home, I started cleaning out my closets. Not just clothes, but old papers, expired files, even furniture that had followed me from house to house without asking if it still belonged. I cleared shelves, donated boxes, called a man named Terry to haul away the extra chairs and chipped end tables. He was polite and didn't ask questions, which I appreciated. There was a kind of relief in letting go. I kept the photograph Emily gave me, the one she titled Still Holding. It remained on the wall above my desk, steady and centered. It anchored the room without demanding attention. The space became lighter, and so did I. About a week later, Victor invited me to lunch. He said he had something to discuss. We met at a quiet bistro tucked behind a bookstore. He wore his usual pressed shirt and calm expression. He never rushed through conversation. That day, he took even longer. He told me there was an opportunity to speak at a national conference on ethical leadership. They wanted someone with first-hand experience, a story, a name. Mine had come up, not from him, but from a colleague who admired how the trust scandal had been handled. I declined. He didn't press. He just said the offer would remain open if I changed my mind. I wasn't afraid of telling my story. I just didn't want it to become a product. There was a difference between sharing and performing, and I had spent too long on stages I didn't choose. After lunch, I walked alone. The city looked brighter than I remembered. Or maybe I was finally seeing it, with eyes not dulled by exhaustion. I stopped at a flower stand and bought a small bouquet of tulips, deep red and almost too open. I brought them home and set them on the kitchen table without a vase, just loose and beautiful in their own right. That evening I found another letter in the mail slot. This one wasn't from Emily. It was from Diana. The envelope was heavier than the others. Inside was a card, thick and cream-coloured. Her handwriting was careful, less sharp than before. She didn't write much. She said she had read the news of my withdrawal from the trust and wanted to acknowledge it. She didn't mention what had happened before. She didn't use words like mistake or regret. But she did write one sentence I hadn't expected. You didn't lose your power. You reclaimed it without burning everything down. I sat with those words for a long time. I didn't write her back, not out of anger, but because some acknowledgements aren't meant to be answered. They're meant to be witnessed and then released. 2 days later, Emily came by after school. She carried a canvas rolled under her arm and a folder tucked into her jacket. She said she had started working on a new series for her portfolio. This time, she wanted to paint scenes from memory. Real moments, not posed, not idealized. I asked what she remembered most. She said the morning I made her pancakes and let her wear mismatched socks to school. I smiled. Not because of the socks, but because she remembered something simple, something ordinary. That kind of memory means it wasn't just the loud moments that shaped her, but the quiet ones, too. She stayed for dinner. We didn't talk about the past. We talked about color and texture, and whether plants could feel when you trimmed them. That night, I stood on the balcony and looked out over the street below. The lights in other apartments flicked on, one by one. A woman laughed through a window across the alley. A child dropped something and called out for someone to come see. The world continued, not needing me to lead it, just asking me to be present. And that was enough. Everything that had been taken from me, I had reclaimed. not through noise, but through clarity, not through revenge, but through return. I wasn't trying to rebuild the same life. I was creating space for a new one rooted not in legacy or control, but in quiet, lasting peace. The morning began like any other. Coffee in the same mug, window half open to catch the breeze. The tulips Emily brought last week had started to fade, their edges curling inward. I didn't throw them out. I left them on the table, a quiet reminder that beauty doesn't need to last forever to mean something. I had planned to stay in that day. No meetings, no errands, just laundry and soup on the stove. But around mid-morning, a call came from an unknown number. I let it ring once before picking up. It was a woman from the ethics review panel. She informed me that the full report on Diana's conduct had been finalized. The findings confirmed what Victor and Marissa had uncovered. Diana had knowingly misused funds and misrepresented ownership in several transactions. The panel's language was professional but blunt. She had violated the standards of her position beyond repair. They offered to send me the full report, but I declined. I didn't need more evidence. I had lived the impact. After the call, I stepped outside for a walk. The air felt heavy, but not unpleasant. The season was shifting again, from early spring to something warmer, softer. The sidewalks were quieter than usual. A few children passed by on bikes. One of them waved. I waved back. I kept walking until I reached the edge of a small park tucked between buildings. I found an empty bench near a patch of dogwood trees in bloom. The petals looked like folded paper, pale and still. I sat there longer than I meant to. Time didn't move fast that day. It stretched and bent, like it was trying to give me room. When I returned home, a letter was waiting on the floor inside the door. No envelope, just a folded page, hand-delivered. It was from Diana. She had written it in her own handwriting, the way she used to when she was young. Not cursive, but sharp and narrow. The letter wasn't long. She didn't deny what had been done. She didn't make excuses. But she also didn't ask for forgiveness. She wrote that everything had collapsed faster than she imagined. That some days, she felt like she couldn't breathe. That she had looked in the mirror and seen a version of herself she didn't recognize. She didn't ask for a reply. She ended the note with one line. "You never stopped being my mother, even when I forgot how to be your daughter." I folded the paper, placed it inside a drawer, and said nothing. That night, I took out one of the old journals I used to keep during the early years of building the company. I hadn't opened it in decades. Inside were notes, scribbled between meetings, grocery lists, ideas I never followed through with. On the very last page, in faded ink, I had written one line. "When the noise stops, what remains is who you are." I closed the journal, set it beside the lamp, and turned off the light. For the first time in months, I slept through the night without waking. In the morning, I didn't feel different, but I felt done. Not finished, just settled. The storms had passed, the damage had been measured, the necessary distance had been created. I didn't know what Diana would do next. I didn't know if healing was possible for her, or if she even wanted it. That wasn't mine to control. What mattered now was that I had not become like her in order to defeat her. I had kept my voice steady, my hands clean, and my boundaries intact. That was enough. That was mine. The afternoon light came through the windows in golden stripes, falling over the hardwood floors like ribbons. The house was still, not empty, just peaceful. I stood in the center of the living room, barefoot, listening to the silence. The same space that once held so much tension now held only breath. It had taken time, and clarity, and distance. I had sold the office building 2 weeks ago, not for profit, but to close a door. The new owners were turning it into a community centre. I smiled when I heard that. It felt fitting somehow. A place once used for silent war, now becoming space for voices, young and old. The foundation transfer had gone through without incident. The lawyers kept it clean and public. Every board member from the former trust was now formally replaced. The money could never be used to control or threaten anyone again. Emily had accepted the position of creative director for the new mentorship program. She didn't make a big deal about it. Just showed up, rolled her sleeves, and started building. She asked me to join the launch dinner next week. I agreed, but only to sit in the back. I told her I didn't need my name on anything. My reward was already complete. It was a strange feeling, finishing something you never thought you'd survive. I had expected more drama at the end, but the real peace came in the quiet moments when no one was watching. Diana hadn't contacted me again, and I hadn't reached out either. There was nothing left to say. She knew what she had done. I knew what I had reclaimed. Sometimes, resolution doesn't come from conversation. It comes from clarity, from walking forward without dragging the wound along. That morning, I went to the beach, not for nostalgia, but because the air felt right. I brought a folding chair, a small thermos of tea, and nothing else. I sat where the sand was firm and cool, watching the waves roll in with their steady rhythm. A little boy nearby was digging a hole with a plastic shovel, his father close behind. They laughed every time the water rushed in and filled the hole again. I watched them until they left, and then I sat alone. I thought of all the rooms I had built, all the boardrooms I had led, all the dinners where my name was said with a smile and a knife behind it. And I thought of the room I was sitting in now. No walls, no ceiling, just salt in the air and sky above my head. This was the only legacy I wanted to leave behind. Not money, not control, but this quiet, knowing that I had returned to myself after being dismantled, piece by piece. I stayed on the beach until the sun dipped low and the wind grew cooler. Then I folded the chair and walked back toward the parking lot. On the way, I passed a woman about my age, walking her dog. She nodded. I nodded back. It felt like a blessing. That evening, I cooked dinner for one, roasted vegetables, a small bowl of soup. I lit a candle, not for mood, but for marking the moment, a quiet celebration of the end. Not a dramatic end, but an honest one. I opened the last letter I had received from the bank. Just a simple notification that all transfers were confirmed. Everything was officially closed. I placed it in a drawer and locked it. I didn't need to read it again. I didn't need reminders. I had lived it. I stepped onto the balcony with a cup of tea, wrapped in a shawl Emily had gifted me years ago. The city lights shimmered below, flickering like tiny declarations that life keeps moving. And so would I. Not with vengeance, not with bitterness, but with quiet strength. The kind that does not need to be loud to be real. The kind that cannot be taken away. Because it lives in you, no matter who walks in or out of your life. Because it is yours, and it always was. If you've ever found yourself starting over after being betrayed by the ones you raised, I see you. This story is for every woman who was once discarded, overlooked, or underestimated. You are not alone, and your power does not disappear just because others fail to see it. If this story moved you, stay with me. There's more healing ahead, and we'll walk it together.